Hi everyone, I'm Alex. Welcome to another one of Metamorphosis Media's character design videos. Today we are working on Captain Vistra Torevir, my character for a Fate Core campaign that recently ended. That campaign was replaced by the Eberron campaign where I play Professor Algie Knackle, who we made last week. So let's talk about the character here, Vistra. She is a sea captain. In Fate Core, you have a something called a high concept, which sort of defines who you are, and it can change over time. At the beginning of the campaign, Vistra Torevir's high concept was Grim Sea Captain Warlock. Part of her backstory is she's from Ember's Gate, which is the last dwarven city on the continent, and this is not a typical D&D type setting. It's very, very low magic. There's an inquisition called the Iron Covenant who protects the world from magic, is sort of their idea. And the city of Ember's Gate is fairly industrialized from a high fantasy standard. I mean, it's closer to Manchester from Peaky Blinders, if you will. There's factories and gouts of fire and smoke and fog and brick buildings, that sort of vibe. And one of the things that happens in Ember's Gate is their justice system. If someone needs to be executed, they are taken out into the bay and in chains and put on a rock, and they let the tide come in. And that was actually Vistra's job before her career in adventuring. Not that it happened often, but she was the high executioner for the city of Ember's Gate. And she became a sea captain because there's very little seafaring that happens in the dwarven culture. They have a urban legend, I guess you would call it, a figure called Old Belsamir, which is a sea monster or a ghost or something that comes on to a ship and brings ill fortune. First time Old Belsamir appears on your ship, if you're fishing, your catch is you're not going to catch any more fish. The second time it happens, if you go back out again, the second time it happens, you lose a crew member. The third time, the ship doesn't come back. Turns out that Old Belsamor was not a legend. Old Belsamor is actually a coven of sea hags that live in the harbor. And Vistra leaving bodies, or leaving victims for them, they took as a tribute and as sacrifice and granted her powers. So she was sort of an accidental warlock, using D&D terminology, I guess. And she started with passive abilities. Things like she could not drown, or it was much harder for her to drown. She could not get lost at sea. Literally, the way the game works is you have different skills, and her most powerful skill was occult. And you don't get class features. There are no classes. You get stunts. And she had stunts that let her use her highest ability, occult, for navigation, swimming, holding her breath, that sort of thing. So she was able to weather storms and outrun nicer and newer ships. Her ship, the Dark Tidings, was old and decrepit, and the joke was sort of held together by duct tape and willpower. So she was brought into the group as, we need to get a ship to get out of here, and the weather's turning. And Vistra doesn't care about the weather and will get you out of town. So, at the beginning, she's a sort of a grim sea captain type character. Her highest abilities were physique, will. Her occult was her highest, then physique, will, and provoke. So she basically was tough and stubborn and started a lot of fights, as well as having this supernatural ability around water. So we're starting as a fairly normal dwarf here, and this being a fairly low magic world, it's also not a lot. The Iron Covenant, the Inquisition that's hunting supernatural threats. They're in heavy armor. They're sword and board fighters, that sort of thing. As a sea captain, Vistra doesn't wear armor. Vistra doesn't even use a weapon because the ability to get away, the ability to sort of weaponize the weather, became the way she fought. And as the game progresses, you learn new stunts, you upgrade your abilities, that sort of thing. Her stunts became less passive. She went from weather conditions like fog and rain don't affect her visibility to she was able to bring negative weather effects penalties to the enemy. So she, like, the joke was she was basically like Eeyore. Whenever she was angry, it would rain, that sort of thing. So she started as a sea captain, executioner, and slowly shifted into more of like a Storm from the X-Men type of ability thing. And I did not mean to. There we go. So, Vistra, the sea captain. Now, as the campaign progressed, you hit major milestones, significant milestones, that sort of thing. You can change your high concept. At the end of the campaign, we stopped playing, but the characters all still lived and we could revisit it. Her high concept had shifted to Wayward Sea Witch. We had defeated a corrupt member of the Iron Covenant who was, instead of hunting magical threats, was learning the magic from magical threats and using that against political enemies, and still doing the job of, killing monsters, but slowly becoming one himself, using very dark magic, that sort of thing. We ended up taking him out, but he did things like destroyed the Dark Tidings. He sank my boat and that sort of thing. We ended up walking across the continent, and as a sea captain who has abilities based on proximity to water, that made Vistra very grumpy. So her high concept turned into Wayward Sea Witch. So that version with the telescope was sort of the before, and now I'm going to make the Wayward Sea Witch version the after. She started, as I said, with passive abilities and not really aware of where they came from, and by the end was in communication with the sea hags directly. They visited her in dreams. She actually went out to the bay in Ember's Gate, went underwater and met them, that sort of thing. So she became much more agentic, much more involved with the magic, and as I said, ended up walking across a continent to take out the big bad who was causing all sorts of problems. I don't know if she necessarily made the world safer for supernatural beings, but we'll see. Now here, I've changed her hair, but I've kept her in this roughly the same outfit. Her pants are tattered and torn, as I said. She went through a couple of shipwrecks and some welcome teleportation, and I am changing her hair to she spent the second half of the campaign literally in the rain, so I'm trying to beat up some of her gear and change the way she looks to show the progress, the passage of time a little bit. That's a little much with the tattering on the shirt. So we're going to stick with the original shirt, I believe. She was able to bring in water effects actively by the end of the campaign. She had flooded a couple of enclosed battlegrounds. We were in a fight in a room. Suddenly the room's in 3 feet of water and people are drowning, level thing. She could make rain or fog any place. But it was always much more of a sort of a supplicant, like not necessarily a prayers, but definitely invoking the favor of old Belsamore. So I'm going with a sort of supplicant on her knees, asking for her gifts type of pose here. And going to end up changing some of the colors out to reflect. Yes, here we go. Darker hair, darker shirt, darker bandana. The ground is a wet asphalt type color. It's glossier than their typical stone floors sort of thing. So this is slowly becoming Vistra, Wayward Sea Witch. I've never really played. This was my second time playing the Fate core system. It was the first time I played a long-term game. We played like 3 or 4 sessions of a different campaign a few years back. Really enjoyed it. It's much more story-based. It's much more. It's less crunchy. It's more about telling the story and less about, rolling the dice sort of situation. So, much more narrative. So it was interesting, and I hope to revisit it someday. Right now we're on a D&D kick, because I've been playing that forever and love it. But this is Vistra as a sea witch. Now, this is a little too passive, a little too friendly, I suppose. I'm trying to get rain effects, that sort of thing. You can change the color on the splatter. Starts as sort of a blood red. And as I said at the beginning, I've now made her hands darker and shinier to reflect as if she's in the rain. Vistra, her big stats were occult, physique, willpower, and provoke. She ended up advancing her provoke even further. She basically is done. She's not she's over this and is starting fights and is more aggressive and more dangerous because she actually has abilities to. She just can't really hurt people, but she can kill them. That's sort of the interesting thing about being a hydromancer. And she became much more of a threat when enemies encounter almost all of our enemies were humans. When they encountered our group, I looked tough. I was a female dwarf, but I didn't have open weapons. I wasn't wearing armor, that sort of thing. I didn't look like much of a threat, but then, people started drowning. So now I'm making it so instead of looking up calmly, she's looking forward and kind of screaming. This is Vistra, the Wayward Sea Witch. So thanks for watching, and I'll have another video for you next week, and take care. Bye.